In the news from Dorchester this week, we are following stories about policing reforms, public transportation, and the election of a new state representative. To bring us up to date is the managing editor and publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, Bill Forry. Thank you very much for being with us, Bill.
Thanks, Chris.
Well, I want to start with this race for a new state rep in the 12th Suffolk District, which I think covers parts of Dorchester, Mattapan, maybe even a little Hyde Park. Dan Cullinane is the incumbent. He's not running again. And I guess the news here isn't about the people still in the race as much as the person who just dropped out. So tell us about him.
Right. So there were some developments in the last week here that are significant in this 12th Suffolk race. It was a four-person race, and there are four people who will be on the ballot. And one of them decided last week to withdraw his candidacy, Cam Charbonnier, who is a young candidate. He's a first-time candidate in his mid-20s. And Cam is a lifelong Dorchester resident, has been an aide to Mayor Marty Walsh, and has been active, especially in Ward 17. A significant candidate, and he decided last week to suspend his candidacy, and he issued a written explanation to his supporters and his potential constituents, explaining the thought process. And it really came down to the fact that he was the only white candidate in the race. There are three other candidates, all of whom are Black, all of whom are attorneys from Mattapan. And the district is 70% Black. The 12th Suffolk, as you mentioned, includes much of Mattapan. It includes parts of Dorchester around Lower Mills and Ashmont, and it also includes parts of Hyde Park. But it is a majority people of color district. Full disclosure, my wife, Linda Dorsina Forry, represented the 12th Suffolk district for, I think it was 7 or 8 years in the legislature. Prior to that, it was Tom Finneran, the powerful Speaker of the House, who won re-election many times in that seat. So Linda was the first woman and the first Black woman to hold that seat. It was hailed at that time as a real victory for communities of color, because that seat had never been held by somebody of color before. Dan Cullinane has been the state rep since Linda Forry went to the Senate. And Dan is a white candidate from Dorchester, a representative from Dorchester, has won re-election 3 times, including 2 pretty significant challenges from Jovan Lissette, who's Haitian American, a Black man, an attorney. Gave Cullinane a pretty good run for his money the last 2 times, and won a number of precincts, and has made the argument, Jovan Lissette, as well as others in the race, that this is really a seat that's intended, the way it was reorganized and redistricted, to be very competitive for a Black candidate to win. When Charbonnier jumped in the race, there were people in the district who were puzzled by the decision to run. And I think Charbonnier said, well, let's leave that to the voters. What he came to find, and what he wrote in this letter last week, was that as he campaigned, he realized this seat really does have, there's a compelling reason to seek to empower and add to the Black power within the State House, which is kind of weak. It's been historically weakened by gerrymandering and other devices. And this is a seat that people, I think, who live there feel pretty strongly should be held by a person of color. Charbonnier came to that realization, explained it in a really powerful essay, really, that he wrote, that we published online and in the paper this week. What's happened also this week is that the Ward 17 Democratic Committee met and interviewed the remaining 3 candidates, who are Stephanie Everett, Jovan Lissette, and Brandy Fluker-Oakley, and decided unanimously to back Stephanie Everett. Everett has run in the past for this seat. She ran and lost to Dan Cullinane when it was an open seat, and she has run for other political office. So there is some early indication that there may be some move to galvanize behind her. However, Brandy Fluker-Oakley, she is a first-time candidate and also an attorney, She has won the endorsement of Representative China Tyler of Roxbury. So she's jockeying for what could be significant support as well. And as I mentioned, Javon Lissette has run twice before. Cullinane beat him both times, but he did increasingly well. And he is also a contender in this race.
Well, as you and I both know, there are state reps who are racial minorities within their districts. Some of them are very popular. On the other hand, some of them get reelected with less than 50% of the vote. And I guess, that could happen. It could have happened certainly in District 14 in the Hyde Park area. But on the other hand, what struck me with Cam is that he gave a reason, his sense of the moment. That was what really intrigued me.
Yeah, I mean, the race from when it began to where we are now, the world has changed, not only with the pandemic, but with the Black Lives Matter movement, the murder of George Floyd. And he referenced all of that in this letter. I'd encourage everyone, even if they don't live in that district, to read it. It's quite a compelling essay. And, quite candidly, when I read it, I realized, we lost a very interesting voice from this field, even if he might not have been, I'm a constituent there, even if he may not have been my first choice as a candidate, he really brings a lot to the table in what he had to say. So there is a bit of a pang of disappointment. A couple of the other candidates said that. Stephanie Everett, Brandy Fluker Oakley both expressed, while they're kind of sad to see Cam leave that stage, but they understand his rationale, and I certainly do as well.
Turning to other legislators, there's a bill right now that was just recently approved by the state Senate for policing reforms, a number of different kinds of reforms. Most of the legislators representing Dorchester are on board with that, but one of them, he had a problem with it, State Senator Nick Collins, and he also came out with an explanation that you carried in the paper.
Yes, Senator Collins, who represents the 1st Suffolk District and includes most of Dorchester, most of Mattapan, parts of Hyde Park, also, frankly, a predominantly Dorchester seat, as well as one that is heavily populated by Black residents, Black voters. So it was a bit of a surprise, actually, to see Senator Collins vote against this bill. There was certainly a backlash to it quickly online, on Twitter. Kind of the Twitter commentariat was quick to pounce on Collins for that vote. He gave what I felt was a pretty well reasoned explanation for his vote that we did publish online, and he put out on Twitter on late in the day on Tuesday, many hours after the vote was taken. Of course, that vote was taken at 4 a.m, which was part of the context of frankly, part of his explanation. But he was more concerned, according to Collins, about the potential for elements of that bill to be used to disproportionately discipline and hurt Black and Latino officers, police officers. His argument, leaned heavily on the argument that we heard from the leadership of MAMLEO, which is the law enforcement union that is Black run here in Boston. Sergeant Eddie Crispin, who is the leader of MAMLEO now, was quite fierce in his opposition to the bill. Senator Collins referenced MAMLEO and other organizations in his letter. It's still kind of it was a tough vote, but it was to vote no on this one. I think it's going to be difficult for Senator Collins to explain to a district that is heavily Black and expected that vote to be a yes vote. I will say that this now goes to the House, and the House is probably going to change this legislation rather significantly. The governor also has a bill, Governor Baker, which has the potential to be in the mix here. So there will likely be another bite at the apple for Senator Collins, and I think he's going to be under quite a bit of pressure from his district. And by the way, this district also includes a lot of police officers in Neponset and South Boston, other parts in Hyde Park and in Mattapan. So he has a tough road there, but he's going to he's probably going to have a different bill in front of him, a compromise bill that may be slightly different than what he had in front of him on Monday and Tuesday.
I know you've been following the uptick in the train service on the Fairmont Indigo line, but maybe even more intriguing, maybe in the longer run too, is an idea from Senator Markey and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, I guess about what you might call closing the racial gap on access to adequate public transportation. What's the most exciting part of that, you think?
Well, Senator Markey and Representative Pressley have joined forces in Congress to propose something called the Freedom to Move Act, which is it's a pretty aspirational bill for this Congress. Of course, this Congress almost certainly won't take it up, but they're introducing it really to put it in front of voters now ahead of the presidential election, with the idea that the next Congress and the next president might move in this direction. It would create a $5 billion fund, essentially, to fund local transit agencies like the MBTA, and to encourage them to either reduce fares or, in part of the bill's language anticipates possibly the elimination of fares. And we have heard and we've seen in Massachusetts some bus lines, for instance, municipalities not charging any longer for bus rides in places like Lawrence. Councilor Michelle Wu here in Boston has pushed that idea here for the MBTA. Obviously, that hasn't come to fruition. But this bill, the Markey-Pressley initiative, would, in some cases, lead to that potentially. And I think that that's the most exciting part of what they've introduced, is the idea of, frankly, evening the scale here for folks, especially poor folks in communities like Dorchester and Mattapan, to give them better access to free transit. On last Wednesday, they were in Mattapan Square to kind of roll this out locally. Senator Markey, Congresswoman Pressley, Councilor Wu were all there, alongside some pretty accomplished transit advocates from our community, including Mayla Miles from Dorchester, who's been a leading advocate for the Fairmont line. And they went to the Fairmont Line station. There's a new one there that opened last year at Blue Hill Avenue. And presently, the Fairmont Line, as you referenced, is in the very beginning of a pilot program with more frequency on the Fairmont Line to get people off buses and onto the trains. So far, we don't have a lot of data on how that's going, but the hope is that the Fairmont Line will become much more viable as an alternative for folks in Mattapan, Dorchester, Hyde Park, to ride the commuter rail into the city and out, and to not be having to be waiting for buses, cramming on buses that have a much longer run time to where they want to go.
One other thing, finally, Bill, you covered the damage to the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary at St. Peter's. Church statues and other things associated with churches, they've been targeted by vandals for a long time. But it seemed that the reaction to this was different. Do people really view this in a different way now?
Well, no, I don't. I think people locally in the neighborhood are a lot less exercised about it than people who might have viewed it from outside of our community and seized upon it as some kind of a political statement. I think that was way overblown. We ran a photo of it in the paper this week. But as you mentioned, there have been statues and worship places vandalized as far back as I can remember. Some of it is maybe targeted at the Catholic Church specifically. There's grievances that former Catholics have sometimes. This may have just been a crime of vandalism, of opportunity. Somebody lit some plastic flowers that were on the statue, of the Marian statue outside St. Peter's, and it caused some scorching to the statue, which I'm sure will be repaired. Last year, we saw a number of churches in Boston vandalized. The police did make an arrest in that case. We've had decapitations of statues at outside Blessed Mother Teresa on Columbia Road in the past. Statue of Jesus decapitated. None of this, I think, it has much to do with much of anything. And the reaction on Facebook and elsewhere was way overblown, and some of it was racial and really over the top. It's unfortunate. It really isn't a reflection of our community, and I understand why people would be upset by it, but cooler heads, I think, have prevailed and understand that it's really not some kind of conspiracy or assault on anyone.